All right, I'd like to take a moment to just say a little bit more about the event that you are at right now. Brainstorm AI is a spin-off of Fortune's annual Brainstorm Tech Retreat, which is now in its 24th year. We started the first Brainstorm AI in 2021 in Boston, and since then it has grown into a global series with events in London, San Francisco, and of course here in Singapore. We've learned so much about AI in the last few years. We've watched the rate of progress like we've never seen. We've learned that there are a few things in this world that AI can't touch, that it is critical to share learnings as the capability rocks the foundations of business and society, that we must come together often to ensure the effects of AI are ethical, equitable, and universally beneficial. So thank you for being part of this event today and for being part of the Brainstorm community. We at Fortune are learning so much from and with all of you, and we're excited to share our learnings through our reporting. Up next, we're going to dive into one of the most urgent debates around AI today. What does it mean to design AI that truly serves humanity? To talk about how we can align policy, capital, and creativity to shape AI, please welcome Stanford Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence Executive Director, Russell Wald, Dragonfly Thinking founder and CEO, Antia Roberts. They'll be in conversation with yours truly. Please welcome them. Hi, folks. Nice to see you. So we've got a tough job. We're following the robot.
I have a better gate.
Yeah. Look, I want to start with you, Antia. You have talked about how AI should be tools that help us think better and not just faster. So for this group at this event, can you expand upon that?
Sure. So a lot of what I see people talking about is how can we make decisions faster, how can we make decisions cheaper, and often what people focus on is how to automate the boring parts of your job. Whereas what we're interested in at Dragonfly Thinking is not how can you think faster and cheaper, but how can you think better? And we're particularly interested in how you can use these tools to do the kind of thinking that individuals and groups find difficult to do. And I can give you some examples of those.
Please do, yeah.
So,
what does that mean? You know,
what does it mean?
Are we asking the AI to think for us? No, we're trying to make ourselves think better, yes?
So we're actually trying to think of not one or the other, but how do we co-create with the AI? So there are two particular areas that we're working on at the moment where that human-AI collaboration is actually able to do better things than either the humans or the AI by themselves. So one of the areas is inhabiting different perspectives. So often people look from their very particular vantage point, from a particular country perspective or from a particular disciplinary perspective, and they find it hard to look at very many different perspectives. The same actually interestingly happens with AI, where it often trends towards the majority particular opinion on something or a centrist approach. But we create cognitive architectures that actually force the AI to inhabit different country perspectives, different disciplinary perspectives, different domain perspectives, and use that to co-create with the individual to help them think through different perspectives when trying to think through complex issues. And we do this, for example, in policymaking, where policymakers are having to think through economic, security, environmental questions, where a single country's perspective or a single disciplinary perspective is just not enough in order to understand the complexity of the particular approach.
Amazing. Now, when we're talking about different perspectives, you know, different viewpoints, this sounds an awful lot like a campus, doesn't it?
Sure does.
Yeah. Russell, you have some strong thoughts about where academia sits in light of, well, all of the private industry that we're talking about here. What do you think about what Antia said? And tell me a little bit more about what you're concerned about with academia today.
Well, first, what Antia said is the interdisciplinary part, and I always appreciate that, and we were just talking about that backstage.
Yeah.
I think that is a really important part of this whole process of not just an interdisciplinary side, but a multi-stakeholder approach. We're going to get the best AI and the best systems when we have voices from different fields that are actually coming together to talk about this.
Like at a Fortune Brainstorm.
Absolutely.
Hey.
Couldn't get better than that. I might be the only, or one of the few people in the academic space around here, but I do think it's critical that academia plays an active role here. The AI moment we see and we enjoy right now would not have happened if we did not have academia in the place that it had been, and the technology has moved to the level it has because of academia. But in the last few years, what we have seen is industry has run away with it because at the front, particularly the frontier levels, because of the high cost of compute, the talent that is now kind of stripping away from the university to go into this space. I don't begrudge industry. I think industry really needs to be a leader in this space, but academia does too. And let me give you a few reasons why. One, what does academia give you? It gives you things that actually does not see a profit at the end, and that really matters. I got here because of GPS. The internet helped me get here. The MRI has scanned my head to my knee. These are things that come from academia, and they matter because no one investor would ever put money behind these things because they would be dead probably by the time they saw a return on investment. So you want academia to be able to help with this. The second important reason of this is you want you need to be able to train the next generation of AI leaders. And I'm not just referring to the next AI or ML engineer, I'm referring also to the regulators. We need to know that people need to know how to be able to regulate if that's the case. And then the third point that I would make here is the institute that I represent, Stanford HAI, is small but mighty, and we have been able to inform policymakers on how to make good decisions in this space and better decisions than they would have otherwise. And companies aren't publishing at the same rate they used to, so this information is getting harder and harder to put out there to help shape a better ecosystem for everyone.
So one thing that I personally care a great deal about is the idea that you can't just rely on willpower alone. And I'm not just talking about AI, I'm talking about anything you want to accomplish. You can't just rely on willpower, you need to put the systems in place to facilitate, to incentivize the goal, whatever it might be. So as I'm thinking about both of these things, and Tia, I'm going to come back to you, these are wonderful goals to have. You would be hard-pressed to find anyone in this room to go, no, we want a monocultural AI, we want a one perspective. I mean, no, look at this group, it's a great group. How do we actually get there? How do we ensure we put the right systems in place to get to that goal?
Well, I should say at the outset of this, we've had some question marks about like industry versus academia. And I'm obviously here in the capacity of being a founder of an AI startup, but I'm actually also a professor of global governance in Australia and a visiting professor at Harvard Law School. And the kind of work that we bring into building our AI applications is deeply informed by decades of research that we have done about better decision making, but also about being more multicultural in our approaches and understanding different country perspectives. So I absolutely agree that we need to see a synergy between these two things. And I also think that the kind of background that we have has really meant that we have asked different questions and we have sought to create different tools to what many people who've just come up in an industry first way would do. But we think that some of the questions we ask, even though they started in an academic approach, have very real-world consequences for businesses, for governments, for diplomacy, for intelligence, and for defense. And so I'll give you one example about that, which is we're currently doing work between Dragonfly Thinking, the AI Collab in Australia, and Deakin University, where we're looking at how language and values are represented in different AI models. So we're looking at a whole variety of different AI models that have different language bases in their underlying training data. We are then asking questions based on the World Values Survey across these models, but we're not just asking them in English, we're asking them in many different languages to see what that triggers. And then we're looking out for the different guardrails that are imposed, and the guardrails that are imposed are very different across the different models. And you actually need to understand these three different levels to not have the monocultural AI of the training data, the way that you interact with it and the language you use, and then the reinforcement learning and the guardrails at the end. And by actually showing those differences, on one level, I think it will be a really interesting series of academic papers, but it's also crucial for if you're thinking about doing business strategy in a cross-cultural system. It's also crucial if you're thinking about doing intelligence analysis. You don't want your American CIA doing intelligence analysis about what China thinks based on US foreign affairs articles. And so I think that many of the things that are less common and that have this more academic background will actually take us into really interesting places that will themselves be very important in industry.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, how do you feel about this, Russell? How do we take this goodness that we can have in an academic environment and actually align it with industry, with legislators, and so forth to actually achieve this goal?
Well, we're in a whole of an ecosystem here. This is my colleague and mentor and boss, Fei Li, often refers to this as a civilizational technology. I like to say it's a civilization-changing technology. We're all in this together, and in that sense, it requires this diverse ecosystem for us to be effectively, to tackle some of these problems. And so there should be a relationship between industry and academia, and there should be a relationship between civil society, academia. This is a multi-part system, and we actually have seen historically, I just noted, for example, the internet. The internet was this part that came from academia, but it was backed by US federal government research money. So there was skin in the game from the US federal government. So government had a role here. Academia had a role here. And then industry later comes in and commercializes it. These are the types of things that we want a balanced ecosystem. And in fact, a lot of the hyperscalers that I engage with in the Bay Area on a regular basis, they want to see a robust academic system. It's not a zero-sum game, or that there is, I know there's a fight for talent, but it's not a zero-sum game. We want to be sure that we are all in a system where we're playing off of each other to be able to learn more from these things. We work with a lot of industry partners because we can help them learn more, whether that is at the hyperscaler or the big tech level, to just your standard enterprise that is trying to understand AI a little bit better. So it's really important that there's just this through line from all these parts that's kind of connecting us all together to effectively do this. We're going to get better AI when we do this. We're going to learn about problems when we do this when we do this in a more unified way. Because when you bring in these different perspectives of industry rushing towards productization, but academia looking at this the other part of this, and government being helping set, in some cases, the right regulation, for example, can actually inspire market confidence, and we can actually see this. We can inform policymakers about all of this. So it's this just wider ecosystem, and we need to know how we're balancing out everyone to be at the table.
Yeah, yeah. And Tia, I'm thinking a great deal about the idea of infusing more humanity into this AI capability that we have, and ever evolving as it is. And I can't help but think about all of the negative headlines that come out about artificial intelligence, hate speech and other things like that that are actually tremendously human, but maybe just not us on our best day, eh? So how do we ensure that we are infusing AI with, for lack of a better description, the right humanity?
Well said.
I think in some ways I would take the question back a step to look at the way different actors are engaging with AI, because I think AI is not just a technology, it's socio-technical. And so the human element of how you engage with AI is really important for the type of output you have. And one of the things that I often observe, because I spend a lot of time in academia and a lot of time with policymakers, is that I'm really seeing a division often into two different camps. So on the one hand, we're often seeing people that are using AI, I would say it's uncritical use. And I would say that that's true sometimes in industry. It's also true sometimes, I hate to say, of students at universities who are actively using it, but not necessarily with many of these critical questions behind them. But on the flip side, I actually would say of many of my professor colleagues and many policy and regulators is that they're actually taking a position of what I would call critical non-use, which is they're very concerned about bias, they're very concerned about transparency, but they're concerned at one step removed without getting their hands dirty and actually using their technology and feeling it and trying to work out where does it have positives and where does it have limits, but how can you start to get over those. If they're of the two camps that I often see, what we actually think we need to do is get many more people into that middle category of critical use and active shaping. So instead of saying, I don't like this AI because it's biased and it reflects its creators of Silicon Valley tech bros, I would invite people who aren't Silicon Valley tech bros to get involved in actually the making and the shaping of how we use these products. And I actually think in both academia and in policy making, you really can't have a genuine sense of the potential, but also how to manipulate these systems unless you become more hands-on with those. So if we want to infuse different types of humanity and have different actors at the table, I also want to encourage these people to step up and actually improve their own technical skills so that they can take a place at the table in the active shaping and the critical use.
I'm going to come to the audience. Oh, yeah.
Can I just say one really quick point about what I find amazing about AI, because it was built in your question,
Yes.
It follows up from the answer, is years ago I was in the about 7 years ago I was in the cybersecurity space, and I make this transition into AI. And the interesting thing about that transition was, for me, cybersecurity, everything it's what's wrong. There's never what's right. It's always, you're always coming from behind the situation.
Well, that's when your infrastructure, you know. No one applauds when the airplane lands on time. No one applauds when the train arrives on time, but the opposite.
But AI has so much about what can be right. There's so much about these areas that are much more positive and exciting. Not to say that there's not a lot wrong with AI as well, but there's so much what's right. But the most important thing is through the process of AI, even myself in this journey over 7 years in this space, I'm learning more about humanity. And so, I'm learning more about what it means to be human more than ever when you are trying to see what could be replicated in a machine to help us be better humans, but at the same time, as you just noted, you want the right parts of humanity, not the bad day, or not the crazy uncle at the Thanksgiving table. So
right, exactly. No one wants the crazy AI uncle.
That's right.
I want to come to the audience if anybody has any questions or comments. All right, I've got plenty. Oh, yes, we have a hand right here in the center. Just wait for the mic to reach you. And when it does, your name and who you're with, please. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Prerna, and I'm with Sony Music. My question is around inclusion, and also because most of the debates and discussions that we're having seems to be, to me at least, very bipolar right now, in the sense that it's the US versus China. But what we're not sort of discussing is the implications of this technology and these discussions into emerging markets or developing countries, so as to speak. So how do we make this technology, how do we make the discussions more inclusive to include voices who may not be here in this room, but whose lives will be immeasurably impacted by what's being discussed here and in other places?
Fabulous question.
Can I take a quick crack at that? Yesterday, I had the privilege of presenting the AI Index, which is our annual report, and in it, one slide I had was on public opinion. And we measure public opinion from across the world. And if you were from trend that we see year over year is if you're from a Western industrialized nation, you have more of a less positive view towards AI, versus if you're not from a Western industrialized nation, you have a more optimistic view. One thing that I found really fascinating about that, and one hypothesis I have for that, is because of the fact that I think other countries have a different perspective. And I'll give you an important part about this. The US State Department years ago put me in touch with a Kenyan minister, and a conversation, and the Kenyan minister, I thought he wanted to talk about data exploitation, and that's what it was. And he said to me, he was a health minister, he said, heavens no, I couldn't care about that. He said, I care about the fact that I have only 3 good cardiologists in this country, and if you were able to make a difference in their lives and truncate their time and make it more available for them to see patients, it's a different perspective. So the interesting thing about that is what is it, you're right that we need to be very inclusive and include the global majority. We internally have programs related to this. We're trying to have a greater social sector program and growing this. But the important part is I think that there's a lot of the haves and the have-nots in this space, and we have to remember that some of this technology can help certain countries punch above their weight. It can help them some people view this as a greater equalizer, but we do have to build these systems, keeping them in mind and making them a part of that inclusion so that they can realize those benefits.
So interestingly, I've seen the same studies, and part of what's interesting about those is that actually the countries that have the largest amount of their background in the training data are also the ones that are the most skeptical and concerned about AI. There's a funny inversion. And certainly when we travel around the world, we see much more enthusiasm in many of the developing countries and the emerging economies than we do in the developed West, where I think there is a bit of a complacency bias of, you know, we don't want to be disrupted, whereas in many of the other countries around the world, I think there is a sense that this could be a leapfrog technology. So this is actually something I think that's going to be really interesting to see who is able to embed these technologies into their workflows. But then the question about whether or not that you're getting the answers that are your standard US answers or your standard Chinese answers, that's when the research on things like the language that you use in prompting becomes very important, because what we're actually seeing is some models are relatively invariant and they give you the same, often American answer across the different languages that you might invoke, but others are actually very sensitive to the language or to other things you do to invoke where you're coming from, and that they will give answers related to that. And so I think it's actually going to be a really interesting place to work out how do you maneuver with these particular models to make them more customized to different communities. And we're certainly seeing this a lot in the Pacific at the moment, where people are both very excited about the potential for AI, but they're also trying to find out how do they keep their authentic Pacific voices within this mix.
Anthea, I just want to follow this by asking you very briefly, our lightning round as we close in here. Whose responsibility is all this? You know?
Everyone's.
Yes.
Everyone.
But when it's everyone's problem, it's no one's problem, no?
But it can't be any one group for exactly the reason that we've said earlier, which is that you need to have multiple people at the table. So I think all of us have a responsibility. So when you're creating these products, I think you need to think not just what do people want, which is often their baser instincts, but what do they want to want, which is their sort of more altruistic instincts. You need to think about not just what's the fastest thing I could do in terms of deploying a US model. You need to think about like what might be the many and varied different perspectives that I need to include, not just because of who my users might be, but because of the kind of cross-cultural intelligence that I want to create. And the same thing I would say for regulators. You can't just think, I make the rules over here and you apply them over there. This is going to disrupt the way you work as well. So I think everybody has to be in as part of the regulation here.
No pressure, right?
Well.
Thank you so much. This has been a wonderfully insightful conversation. A round of applause, please. Thank you.
Thank you.